Welcome to the Adventures in the Sky podcast, sharing inspiring stories to empower you to be dreamers and doers. For the sky's the limit. Proudly presented by Flying Fillies, an uplifting historical adventure book inspired by the women Air Force service pilots, WASP of World War II. As America's female aviation pioneers, the WASP are the original power girls. Hi, I'm Christy Hui, author of Flying Fillies. In every episode, you'll hear stories from the WASP, kin of WASP, women aviator pioneers sharing their secrets to success. Their trials and tribulations pave their inner journey to becoming trailblazers. Welcome, everyone. I have the pleasure to be speaking with Dawn Lucas today. Tom is the son of the WASP Dorothy Smith, also known as Dorothy Lucas, Class 44-W-7. Tom, thank you for joining me today, and I would love it if you can introduce yourself to the audience.
Yeah, it's my pleasure, and I really appreciate you doing this. Like you said, my name is Dawn Lucas, and currently live in Austin, Texas, but I guess I'm fourth in the line of five kids, but the only son my parents had. So I guess I'm their favorite son. And, I'm really just proud of my mom, and the purpose is I'm grateful to you, Christy, for doing this to ensure that the history and, what these women sacrificed and the trails they blazed is not lost or forgotten.
Definitely. I am, the WASP are my heroes and my inspiration. So I am so excited to be speaking with you because I think every WASP have her unique story. And we are here to talk about your mom's story today.
Great. I mean, I'm anxious to share.
Yes. So thank you for joining me, and let's get started. The WASP has been flying for more than 80 years. I'd like to know, first of all, how did your mom develop an interest and a passion for flying?
Yeah, I think my mom was always adventurous spirit. And actually, a friend of hers kind of mentioned to her that they had this program. And my mother was enrolled in like secretarial classes at George Washington University in the District of Columbia and working at the Pentagon as well, just as a secretary. And so when her friend approached her, they said that there's this flying program called the WASP for women. Would you be interested? Well, she filled out her application and sent it in. And that was kind of the only impetus she needed. It just sounded exciting. And so she sent it in, and at first she was too young, so she got a denial notice. And then once she turned, because I think you had to be 20 years old or what? Yeah. So she reapplied, I guess, when she hit the right age and was accepted.
That's incredible. So she did not know how to fly before she joined the WASP.
She did not, and I think all the women had to have like 200 hours, or
yes,
so there was some requirement to have ground school and an element of flying, and so she took flying lessons in Frederick, Maryland, which was outside the District of Columbia because you couldn't fly within 50 miles of the capital. And she borrowed $200 from her mother, who, back then was a lot of money. And she went out there with this other woman, and they learned to fly in a Stearman. And that got her the qualification back for flight that she needed to eventually go to Sweetwater. I'm not sure my grandmother had a lot of money anyway. So I think it was a big sacrifice for her as well. But I think it just kind of shows that, I don't know, they thought a little bit differently back then, and I'm grateful for it.
Yeah. Did her friend also join the WASP program?
That's kind of an interesting and sad story, because right before they were scheduled to leave for Sweetwater, her name was Margaret, and I don't remember her last name, but her parents convinced her that it was too dangerous. They didn't want her to fly. And so she didn't go with my mother to Sweetwater. She became instead a flight attendant for Penn Central Airlines and was actually killed in a plane crash.
That's so sad.
And I know that there are tons of those stories that are out there, but boy, it just, I
Sure.
mean, it really hits home.
Your mom joined the WASP program in 1944.
Right.
So how long did she serve? Not too long, right?
Yeah, she started in the spring of 1944 and graduated, I think, in September or October of 1944. So that was the only time she served, and then she was stationed at Moore Field in Harlingen, Texas, in the Valley, and that was her administrative assignment until the WASP were disbanded in December. So
Right.
it was only during that time that she served.
A few months.
Right.
3 months. Wow. What are some of the her favorite memories as a WASP that you heard?
You know, I can always remember my mom talking about how much she loved the AT-6 and flying in it, and later in life when we were able to get her a ride with the commemorative Airforce or whatever, she was like, well, they offered me to take the stick, but I didn't rack it over or anything like that. So I know she was pretty adventurous anyway. Um, I think the memories that she had are just kind of the camaraderie and the friendships that she made.
Mm-hmm.
She never indicated she missed flying. I mean, I think she could have continued, but I don't think she ever indicated that she missed it. But I certainly think she missed the sisterhood.
The camaraderie.
Yeah.
I think that really, for me, it was so unique about the WASP that the sisterhood they have. And does she have any lifelong friends from the WASP program, Tom?
I think she did. She kind of stayed in touch with my mom was really outgoing. My dad was kind of more a wallflower. but my mother was pretty outgoing, and she always had really good friends throughout her life. And so she stayed in touch with some of the WASP, especially those that were in Austin. Millie Dalrymple is one who's, I think her little cockpit or airplane is actually on display in the WASP Museum in Sweetwater, but she lived in Austin and mom played bridge with she and a number of others. And it's just interesting because Millie's grandchildren went to high school with my children. So
Wow.
so they're all kind of intertwined. It's a very small world when you realize it, but she did stay in touch, and I think the reunions that they had, starting in probably the '80s or whenever it was, they really kept her in touch with a lot of other people despite the distance in miles.
Oh, she did make the journey every year to go to the homecoming events.
You know, the homecoming seemed to come later, but they had these regional kind of WASP reunions.
Mm-hmm.
There was one that we took her to in Dallas, and she'd been to some others that maybe my sisters had taken her to as well. But once they started doing the kind of annual things in Sweetwater, we took her pretty much every year for about the last, I don't know, 8 or 10 years.
That is so heartwarming. Being at Sweetwater, that was my first year where I met you.
Mm-hmm.
I could feel the energy in that hangar, in that museum. How special it is to be on that ground.
Yeah, it's very tough to know that there are very, very few of them. My mother just passed away May a year ago. She was 99, and I always thought she'd be a
Oh, I'm sorry.
centurion. No, I mean, she
Wow.
lived a very full and happy life, and we're certainly blessed to have her in our life for that time. But those annual reunions, every time we would be driving home, and it was about a 4.5 hour drive to get her back home. I'd say, well, Mom, you ready for next year? Oh, I just don't know if I can. I just don't. But she always had some intestinal fortitude where she could reach down and grab a little extra. And she was always on point for that reunion for those 2 or 3 days. She was really in good shape and probably and where she was meant to be, I think.
Mm-hmm. And that's not an easy location to get to. And so
No,
for her to make it.
I always tell people, when I'm trying to tell the story and remind people either on Facebook or something of the WASP, hey, if you're driving to Colorado to go skiing and you got to go through Amarillo anyway, it's on the way and it's 2 miles off the highway, spend a few minutes to go there and learn the story of the WASP. But Sweetwater is not a destination unless you're in town for the Rattlesnake Roundup, which I think is in, I don't know, February or March. It's something you got to go see. It's a very important piece of history. that
Yes.
just can't be lost.
Yes, I was so touched when I made it last year. I mean, in past April.
Yeah.
And just to experience the energy in the room, seeing the planes that they flew and where they were trained, it just gave me a much fuller and richer experience of what they went through.
Oh, I agree. I one of the first times we took my mother back, we kind of drove around the facility and everything, and over kind of
Mm-hmm.
where the main gate was, where the women checked in when they were first arrived, and
Mm-hmm.
she'd been living in basically Washington D.C. and drove with three other women in a convertible to Sweetwater, Texas, and I got to feel like when she got out of the car, she looked around and goes, "God, what have I done?"
That's amazing. What were some of your favorite memories of your mom?
I always relished just being able to go down. My mom was a character. I enjoyed going to visit her, whether when they were living in Wimberley or San Antonio. We'd go to Fort Sam Houston. There were some in the quadrangle. There were some deer there, and we would go feed the deer with my kids. They were tame, and kind of gave my kids a little bit of the military aspect and background in my mom. And I just know how much she enjoyed it. Maybe I don't know if she was the perfect military wife, but she was certainly a trooper to traipsed all over the country and the world with my father and with kids in tow. And she always made things an adventure for all of us. And so we were blessed in that way. I mean, we were blessed that her personality was larger than life, because my dad didn't talk about things much. And quite honestly, I think many of the women who were WASPs they kind of downplayed their role at the time. I just
Mm-hmm.
think it was like, that's who they were. It was like, hey, we just want to do our part. And that's how we did it.
It's kind of like your mom, like,
Yeah,
okay,
exactly.
the nation needs help and I'm going to apply.
Exactly. And of course, when the WASP were disbanded, they had all the, male aviators coming back from Europe and whatever, and
Mm-hmm.
they were going to take those jobs anyway. So
Right.
I really respect the ladies who continued to fly. I mean, I think it would have been interesting, because I'm not so sure my mom wasn't a better pilot than my dad, and he was an instructor.
And your mom, what did she do after?
She was
Um,
just, the WASP disbanded in December of 1944. She and my dad married in Houston in 1945.
so she got
And
married. Uh-huh.
she got married, and from there on, it was 5 kids. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure I'm sure we really blessed her life. Actually, we probably made it more of a living hell, but
So, when she talks about her WASP days,
uh-huh.
what was the one thing that she always talks about?
I think her favorite story was after she had graduated and was assigned to Moore Field, where my father was an instructor, and they had sort of started dating.
Oh, that's how
She
she met your father.
that's where they met, exactly.
Ah.
And so after they'd started dating, she was coming in. She flew the tow targets for male gunners to shoot at.
Mm-hmm.
And after she had dropped her target, she was coming in for a landing, and she saw my dad on the flight line, and he had his cadets out there. And she thought, well, I'm going to make this the best landing I've ever made. And she said she leveled off too high and bounced it down the runway, and probably the worst landing she'd ever done. And she always finished that story with, but he married me anyway. So, so I think that between that and, her brother was on active duty in the Air Force, and he was a navigator, and his plane actually crashed, and he was killed in that crash
Oh, no.
in 1944 in England. And she was scheduled to solo that day when she got the telegram from her mother, and my grandmother was actually requesting her to quit, just come on home. It was too dangerous, and
Mm-hmm.
she just didn't feel like she could do that. And so they actually gave her like another hour to kind of prepare mentally for the
Mm-hmm.
solo. And she had a classmate, B. Haydu, or from a previous class, sort of sat down with her, and I think gave her a little bit of comfort and whatever. And then mom went and soloed that day.
Wow. Would you say
So
that that is her biggest challenge, probably during the program?
I think so, because I know how close she was to both of her brothers.
Mm-hmm.
She talked about them a lot, and they had both served in one aspect of the military, and so despite her age or whatever, she always talked about, oh God, I love my brothers. I mean, I loved them.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm. You know that you said your mom's favorite plane is a T-6.
It is, yeah. She
The
never talked about
museum,
anything else.
the museum just purchased a T-6.
Right, right. Oh, and we were able to get mom flights after she was in her 80s. The first time she flew with a commemorative Air Force pilot and out in Burnett, Texas, which is about 30 minutes from Austin. And, I'm thinking we take her out there, it might be a guy my age taking her up, who's got a love for vintage aircraft. The guy came down the steps. He was the same age as my mother. And I'm like, oh my gosh, and I never underestimate a woman or any, unless it's her weight or her age, and and never doubt their ability. I mean, it's just my mom was active and a go getter, and all her life, and I think it taught me a lot about persevering.
Yes, I think that is a common trait amongst all WASP.
Mm-hmm.
They're all adventurous, very courageous. They don't let anything stop them.
They also didn't crave attention,
Right. Humble.
and really, they were very humble until, I can't remember if it was in the 70s or whatever, and somebody was introduced as the first females to fly military aircraft, and I think that was when the people who'd been WASP said, "No, wait a minute," and that's really when they started getting their just kind of due and attention. And it took a few people that with that never say die kind of thing to kind of to get them, the Congressional Gold Medal and, to keep their history alive.
She made it to the Congress to receive her medal, though, right?
Yeah. Matter of fact, it was interesting because all 5 of the kids made the trip as well. We all,
oh my goodness,
we were all able to be there for that. And
wow,
that ceremony, they said it was it was the annex to the Capitol, and they said it was the most people they'd ever had in that building ever.
wow.
So
I am so glad to see that happen.
Yeah, I mean it's just fabulous, and we still talk about mom. I mean, it's just
sure,
she lives on for sure.
Yeah, and they're finally given credit where credit was due.
Exactly, and I mean, we'll keep going back to Sweetwater for the reunions, and my mother's display I think is there through March this year. They're gonna highlight 6 WASP every year because it was just it's just a way to get more attention on certain ones. And so last year was when my mom was first put up there, and I was grateful to be able to go and see that. And then one of my sons and his family has already made the trip, and I'm hoping the other 2 will get there before March for sure.
That's so nice. Now, how does your mom's passion for flying influence you guys?
I think it's just an adventurous spirit, and because my mom was or my dad was in the Air Force, and we moved around. I mean, there were she had 4 kids by the time we flew to the Philippines, and then by the time we got back stateside in North Carolina, my youngest sister was born there. So I think there was always and I can remember going to parades at North Carolina and Seymour Johnson when my dad was on the flight line marching with his crew and that sort of thing on the flight line. So I think it always, we don't living on Air Force Base, you always saw planes flying overhead, et cetera. And so I think there was always this adventurous spirit. Now I was the only one who chose to kind of go into the military service at all. School was, after I got out of high school, I wasn't sure, I think it was football and baseball that probably kept me in it. And so after 2 years of college, I joined the Army, and parents were like, why do you want to be a ground pounder when you could fly airplanes? And I'd actually I took the flight aptitude test to fly helicopters in the Army, and I'd had a fractured skull before, and that eliminated me from consideration, but I was still able to go to officer candidate school and then jump school and ranger school. And so I was the only one who kind of followed that passion. And I've always had an adventurous spirit or daring whatever. So I'd always want to jump out of airplanes, and I got paid to do it. So that was a good thing.
Well, that's good. At least you're up in the air.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
In your opinion, how did being a WASP change your mom's life?
I think I've commented about her being adventurous, but I think it gave her a lot of independence. I saw a lot of strength in my mother, intestinal fortitude, and that sort of thing. My father battled depression for a long time while he was on active duty and then afterwards. And my mom, whenever he was in the hospital or whatever, she went and visited him every day and was kind of his. I mean, she was the rock. Certainly, she was the rock of our family. And I think that being a WASP gave her insight into what she could accomplish as long as she just kept focused. And she was probably the most focused person I've ever met.
Gives her inner strength.
Yes, exactly.
What was the one thing that she always say about being a WASP?
You know what? She just always said, I just loved it all. She was asked that question on a panel at the Bob Bullock Museum in Austin when the WASP were highlighted, and she got that very question. And they said, what's your favorite? What was your favorite thing? She said, honestly, I just loved it all.
Loved it all.
Yep.
What was the best advice she gave you or your siblings growing up?
I think for me, it was like, once you start something, you don't quit. She always said, well, I was a child of the Depression, and she always wanted us to have good shoes. But I mean, she was heroic without, and I'm almost ashamed to say I probably didn't view her as heroic until probably the last 15 or 20 years, probably because she didn't see herself as a hero. But come to know and appreciate that better. And so I think to persevere, to not quit, as long as the goal lives in your mind, it's possible, and follow it until that's not a possibility. And that's, I think, what certainly I've tried to do.
Did she ever give you or the grandkids advice that harkens back to her WASP days?
I don't know if it's so much of the WASP, but I think the Depression, being a WASP and the Depression probably were the two biggest events that left the biggest impact on her life. I mean, she hated for us she put something on our plate. She expected us to eat it, and she said, eat it and be thankful. And so, for that, I was born in the 50s, so that still left a very vivid impression on me, and I probably passed it on to my kids a little bit too. But I just think the perseverance and the fact that I flew airplanes when nobody thought we could, and we did the job that nobody thought we could do. Don't ever try to tell me that something's out of reach, or
Right. Everything is possible because
exactly.
I've done it.
Yeah.
And so I hear you use the word perseverance, and I agree with you. They demonstrated, every WASP demonstrated that quality. What other words would you use to describe your mom or the WASP that stood out?
Certainly, I think that they were brave. Perhaps the biggest story about, that, I guess it was the B-29 or something when it was just coming out and being, none of the male pilots wanted to test fly it because they considered it to be a death trap or whatever. So the WASP went up and were the test pilots. And, when they landed and got out and the men saw who were doing it, I guess it struck a chord with them too. So certainly bravery comes to mind. I used heroic because, I really didn't start using it until, like I said, the last 15 or 20 years, when you just sort of reflect and look back. And the movie Hidden Figures came out about the women mathematicians that did the calculations for NASA
wonderful movie.
To orbit the moon and stuff like that. And I mean, the WASP were certainly that caliber and that kind of a people that they just, we can't afford to let that history die. It just can't. So, bravery, heroic, honest, respectful. And my mom was always a lady. I rarely heard her curse. Rarely. She got mad. She threw a trash can at me once when I was in high school. But she was always, she was a calm in the storm for sure. And I think all those experiences as a WASP made her that way.
Certainly. There's a lot of grace.
Yep.
That's why we can't forget them.
Yeah. So thank you to you for allowing me to do this, for bringing their history to the forefront in your book, and attendance at the reunions, and anything I can do to help along the way, please.
Tom, you mentioned to me that your mom inspired a children's book.
Oh, she did? Yeah.
Yeah. Tell me about that. And how do our listeners get that book if they were interested?
Well, it's for sale at the WASP Museum, so you can contact them
Okay.
there. It's on Amazon as well. It's called Dorothy the Brave.
Oh,
Um,
and it's
and
your mom's story, right?
it is my mom's story, and
Ah,
it's true to form, and it's designed for kids, up through about second or third grade. So my grandkids they all have a copy. They all have a signed copy, and it was written by a dear friend of our family. Her name was Megan Flanagan. Golly, I'm almost embarrassed. You asked me that, and now I can't remember her married name. But Megan, when my boys were in middle school in Austin, they were all given the task to interview somebody who had been alive during World War II or a veteran, and they all
mhm.
all three of my boys interviewed my mother.
Oh my goodness. How
Well,
special is
Megan,
that?
Megan, who wrote this book, interviewed my mother, and it left such a lasting impression on her that she wrote the book about my mom. It was something she'd always wanted to do, and so she followed through. Her name is Megan Brown,
Mm.
Browne. There's her married name, and she lives here in Austin. And I actually drove her down to San Antonio a couple of times to visit with my mother, and so she had all the background from her report that she had done when she was in middle school, and then a couple of in-person interviews as mom was, probably in her late 80s, early 90s. Is kind of what prompted the book. And so in April of 2022, I read the book to my mom, and she passed away about 3 weeks later. And
Wow.
we were able to video me reading that book to my mother.
Oh my goodness. Did that put a smile on her face?
Uh, yeah, it was actually April of 2021. She was, and kind of interjected. Because it's my mom's story, and I said, "Do you remember being in being on the farm in Norfolk?" And she goes, "Oh yes, oh yeah," and I mean,
Mhm.
mom always remembered me and my sisters, my wife, and so we did a lot of during COVID. I talked to her through the window at the assisted living place where she was living, and always took pictures of my kids and their kids and stuff like that. So she was always mentally very with it right up until she passed away. And so I'm grateful to have those times, and I'm grateful that she was able to, I was able to read the book to her, and
Yes, just before she passed.
she
Yeah,
actually had a copy of it in her room, on display for the 3 weeks, I guess, prior to her
that's
passing away.
that's very special. That's
Yeah.
great. If and last question to wrap up,
Uh-huh.
if the WASP program wasn't so successful during World War II, do you think that there would be women flying for the military today in combat missions?
Boy, that's a hard question. I think eventually there would have been some. There are women out there who, without the WASP, would have been those trailblazers. They would have
Mm-hmm.
been those. My wife would likely have been one of them. I mean, I just there are women who are strong and brave and heroic and all those things, like the women in Hidden Figures. That I mean, they came along in the '60s, and these women were flying in the '40s. There were going to be women who blazed that trail, and so yeah, I got to believe that maybe we wouldn't be as far along, but I think it'd be happening. I mean,
Well said.
you can't turn a blind eye to what anyone is capable of accomplishing. Be it women, minorities, it doesn't matter. I mean, there are no bounds to the imagination, none.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the biggest thing that inspires me about the WASP is about self-empowerment. No matter where how you grew up, no matter your background, if you want to set your mind to it, then you do it.
There's always got to be a salmon somewhere, somebody that's willing to swim
Hmm.
upstream, and that
Hmm.
person was Hap Arnold with Jacqueline Cochran, and willing to
Hmm.
support the idea that women could do that job. And I think that I think there are men out there who could support that women can do this given the
Hmm.
opportunity.
And
I,
they
I
answer the
just
call. Yeah,
Yeah,
there will
yeah,
be people answering the calls.
yeah.
And so I think that's why we do this, Tom. May the spirit of the WASP live on and inspire all of us. and
Yes.
all our future generations.
Yeah. Thank you for your efforts as well. I really appreciate it. And
Thank
for
you,
having me
Tom.
today.
Yes, thank you. What a pleasure. Thank you for coming on.
All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. That's all for this episode. Thanks for listening to the Adventures in the Sky podcast. To all of you dreamers and doers, believe in your dreams. For when you dream and do, the sky's the limit. Until our next story, unlock your extraordinary within and live inspired. To join the Flying Fillies Adventure Club, visit www.flyingfillies.com.